am Dr. Kim Lannon. I don't see myself on the screen, but that's a technical issue.
I'm looking now. Your thing's gone, and it's like
there I am.
See, when I use that, when I take that finger to cue you.
I tried so hard this morning to be right on cue. I watched you. I was looking. I was doing the whole like real thing, and there you still.
When I use that finger for the cue, other things get undone. So,
you know, you. Oh my God!
That's why I avoid it.
Next week, do not cue me in. I got it.
Okay, great.
Okay, let's just keep it simple for you.
Excellent.
Make it easier.
Thank you.
And I was so on it this morning, and I actually had a dream. Crazy enough,
You were 10 minutes late.
I was 5 minutes late, and it's my show.
Yeah, that's right.
So, good morning.
Just challenging your definition of on it.
So, really, you want to challenge me on being on it?
I know, as I blow the opening.
And I could give you other examples of me having to call you in the past 2 weeks going, the podcast still isn't up. The podcast still isn't up. And then that's because people are telling me, Kim, I can't find your podcast. Did you do a podcast this week? I don't know. I have to call Lou. Did I do a podcast this week?
One button.
One button. You didn't hit
They didn't hit the last publish. Had everything done. Just didn't hit publish.
I was like, what time was that? Like 7:30 in the morning the next day too. I was like, where's my podcast?
Yep.
People are looking for my podcast. That's because people start texting me tomorrow, like Thursday. They'll be like, multiple people be like, your podcast isn't up. Why isn't it up? Is everything okay?
That's good.
I know. I love that. I love that. So anyway, good morning.
Good morning.
It is spectacular out.
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
We went from 50 to 90.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's
we went from winter to summer.
Yep.
In less than 3 days. So.
And we're just skipping spring these days. Going from late winter to summer.
We've been doing that for a while.
I know. Yeah.
So it's not, and all of a sudden, as I'm driving up here today, I'm like, oh my God, everything's like filled in green. I can't even see anything off the side of the road. So it's fabulous. And then as you get older, you know how this is like a phenomenon. All of a sudden, it's like, wow, summer's going to fly by. It's like, here it is. It's going to be June. And then, and I'm looking at it going, well, this is good. Enjoy every second of it because it's going to go right by you. It's going to be September. And I'm going to be like, oh, because it's so quick here.
Yeah, but there are bugs now. And
oh, God.
The greenhead things are out.
Oh, are they up in your spot?
Not the greenheads, but they put these things out to kill them.
Oh.
In the marsh.
Oh, do they?
These boxes.
Oh, that doesn't do anything.
I know.
There's so many of those stupid little flies. They hurt. Yeah. That's why I don't go up to your beach in the summer.
Greenheads are awful.
Because they hurt.
Yep.
And they just attack you. And you can put spray all over you and it doesn't matter. They still attack you. They go right through the spray. They don't care.
Yeah, they're vicious.
They're brutal. That's why I don't go to that beach in the summer.
Yeah.
I go to the other beach where there's other issues.
As long as the wind's good, we're okay.
In the right direction.
Yeah.
So anyway, besides it being almost 90 here today, I just came back from 4 days where it was 100+ degrees every day.
Wow.
It was
But
lovely.
It's a dry heat.
It was a dry heat and it didn't feel like 100. It was so glorious. I was like, oh my God, it's like sun. I went from tundra to this is amazing. So I was very happy. The downside is due to my gallbladder surgery, I couldn't lay in the sun.
Well, you could.
Well, I did, but I had to cover half my body because of all the lovely little scars, but I don't want any scars, so I had to make sure. But it was so nice.
Come on, Kim, show your scars.
No,
it's good mental health, right? Show your scars.
I'm thinking no,
or embrace your scars. Don't show them.
I don't want to show them.
Yeah,
but I don't want them, so I have to not let them be sunned, or else they will be discolored, and then people will know.
That I didn't know.
So that's why I didn't.
Okay.
That's why I didn't expose them. It wasn't vanity. It was if I exposed them to the sun, they would turn color. And I would like them to not be visible.
Yep.
Since I have worked hard to not be bloaty. As I walked in today, I said, I'm still bloaty. I'm so bloaty. I still have air coming up into my shoulder. And I'm like, ugh. And I thought for sure that the plane ride would make it worse. But it actually didn't.
Oh, good.
So I was very happy about that. Minus the fact that I'm not a big fan of flying American Airlines. And I never fly
American.
They're always late. They have they have a very bad hit rate of being on time, and they were fine, but coming back, of course, they were not. And that makes for it's a lot of emotional stuff that goes on when you're stuck. And you got things to do, so you have to just go with it, which I did. But this time I went and unplugged from my life. So I didn't bring a computer. I didn't bring any of my work. I didn't do anything. And I'm like sitting there like, oh my God.
Acceptance,
So,
right? You have, in
I
that
did.
case, you do have
did.
to accept your circumstances.
Now, here's the cool thing.
Yeah.
I met these two people at different points, but there's fascinating people, which I do love meeting people. And I had the most interesting conversations about life. And it was just such a weird happenstance. I won't say his name on air because I don't even know if he knows that I know his name, but I'm very good. But I'm sneaky. So this man that I met was really interesting. You would never think, like, he was talking about running because he saw me with my marathon jacket on. Yep. And he was talking, this was in DC. And we're chatting and talking, and older gentleman lives here in Newton, and but we were talking about running. So we were just doing the running thing. And then all of a sudden, right next to me, I had pushed over this little envelope that was sitting between us. I pushed it over because I didn't want to spill my dinner on it. And I pushed it over so that it wouldn't get anything on it. But on the top of it said the White House. I know where he's been today, yep. Kind of thing. So anyway, so as we're talking, and so finally I couldn't help myself because it had, broken the ice for at least a good 30 minutes. And I said, so you're at the White House today.
Yeah.
And he gladly opened up his phone to show me what he was there for, and it was really cool. And then I figured that he had something to do with one thing. And then when I asked him, he said, oh, actually not. And this wonderful, this is what I love about meeting people, this wonderful story about who he is and what he does, and not being a runner, but the running community thing opened the door to being like meeting this really amazing human being, and then hearing about his wife's work and his work and what they do for a living and how they help people. I was floored. And I just love that. So the fact that I didn't have any work with me and no computer and no exams to grade that I needed for my final, I got to meet lovely.
Did you book him for the show?
I didn't, but so here's the thing. I'm going to, but he didn't know that I figured out his name because that's so awful. Because I'm a little detective. When he put his credit card down to pay, I saw his name.
Yep.
Not that takes rocket science, but I literally was like careening my head because I didn't want to get into the whole, like, he didn't ask me my name. But of course I found out who he was. And so he's in my queue. So I'm going to be reaching out to him because he's really, he was a great, he lives near, I will say, near part of the course, like really near part of the course for the Boston Marathon. But what he does for a living, and then just sort of some of the other things he does in life are really interesting. And Excellent. He does a lot of philanthropy. I always find people that are philanthropic, and I love that. So I'm excited. He doesn't know this yet. He does know I have a podcast. So I'm sure figured out my name. I never had to tell him my name because I mentioned my podcast, just like, oh, I have a podcast on Facebook. And then he did like some search, I don't know. And then he found it. And so,
nice.
So we mutually know each other without knowing each other's names.
Without knowing you know each other's names.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but I saw him looking it up when he was being sly. So I was being sly and he was being sly.
It's being observant. That's all.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it felt sort of like, I was like, there's that credit card. What's his name?
Have you been to the White House? I've never been.
I have.
I've been to it. I've never been in it.
Oh, yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, for a function? Or a tour?
A semi, not a public tour, a semi-private. Okay. I'd like to have a private tour. Anybody listening that would like to have me on a private tour?
Well, we'd all like to have a private tour,
right?
Yeah.
So I would like to be on that. So yeah, if I had done the Olympics, I would have been in the White House full on. But since I didn't actually go in as one of the 6, I didn't make it into the White House. So anyway,
and we solved the next presidential election.
Yes, we did. So
we have an argument.
So we have an argument. So the psychological phenomenon of this is why it came up. I'm going to say this first. So I came in today and I said, I've decided who I want for president. And you said, who? And I said, Taylor Swift should be president, which I am sure I just heard a bunch of, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. Well, first of all, she raises the economy in every single country she's in. People are flailing themselves in front of her to have them be part of their economy from countries all over the world. Maybe
she couldn't do that as president.
Well, she couldn't do that, but so here's the thing. If you've ever listened to Taylor Swift, minus what you were saying about her lyrics, which are well-deserved lyrics for the things that have happened in her life, and why not make money off of your life experience? Because that's what all writers and singers do, by the way.
All I'm saying is it's an insight.
But she actually has really great political views, and she's well-read and she's well-versed, and quite frankly, I think she has more on the ball in a lot of the areas that she talks about prior to even being this famous. If you go back to her previous years,
Yep.
than most people I hear on CNN, at Fox, or CNBC, or whatever station you want, BBC too, anything, because she actually doesn't have that. She doesn't have the skin in the game, so she can. So she has a little bit different perspective.
Plus, she's untouchable.
So now here's an interesting poll that came out that I heard yesterday. I was laughing because this is what spawned me into this. Is that there was a poll done, loose poll, but a good end, like a good number of people. So Biden had a 39% rating of likability and electability. It was electability and likability together, 39%. And it was, so bear with me. I know that the other poll would say like Trump's ahead, whatever. But Trump had 36%, so he was a little bit behind, and Taylor Swift took the rest.
Wow.
And this is like, and there was like a little small margin of like some other group of people, whoever they were, but Taylor Swift had, by and far, like hands down. And that's what got me thinking, like, because I've seen a whole bunch of stuff over the years. I follow her, not like a Swiftie, but I had sort of followed her as a female rights person. And then she talks about, equality for both men and women. And she knows really a lot about international diplomacy and talks about it very articulately.
Okay, so I'm going to look this up.
I
have no clue about her political views.
Yes, so she actually, that's one of the things, like her father always cringes because her father, if you've ever seen any of her interviews, this is pre 5-10, in the last 10 years, but it's pre 5 years ago for sure. Her father would cringe because she'd have very specific stances on things. And she has had, I think she's been to Congress a couple of times. She's had conversations with people, like, so that she knows what she's talking about, at least on some level. And given the fact that, I don't think she's of age yet to be president of the United States. What is it, 36?
I think so.
36, 35, 36, which I think is ridiculous, but nonetheless.
My pick was The Rock.
I know.
Yeah.
I like him too. But he doesn't
he's
have.
Bright.
He is, well, yeah.
He's got charisma.
So does Taylor Swift.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And what was your retort to when I said Taylor Swift? You said, no, The Rock and Taylor can be his vice president. I said, no, she as a woman can be president. He can be her understudy.
Her understudy.
So
that'd be quite a tour, wouldn't it?
Oh, that would be so good.
Yeah.
Well, it would be a nice change of flavor for sure for us. And it would be at least youth. I'd like some youth. Youth would be helpful. You know why? Because it regenerates the mental fortitude of people when there's youth and new ideas and not just old blood. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Not to say that wisdom over time isn't wonderful, but wisdom over time with lots of anger behind it is not a good thing.
I'm debating.
Speaking?
Yeah. Debating about bringing this where I want to bring it.
Oh boy, here we go.
This is an interesting thing, and this is a political take, but it's not a political take.
Remember, we're not going political because I don't do political, but go ahead.
No, I understand. And I was just kind of shocked at myself by this. Do you remember the South Dakota governor who got in trouble because she shot her dog?
I almost went there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I almost slipped and said something inappropriate.
And as I was reading through those stories,
I have to breathe through this. Let me breathe. Wait.
No, it's okay.
Yep.
As I was reading through those stories and thinking that she was a prime candidate for vice presidential run.
No.
I was thinking to myself,
she's out for me.
I was thinking, I despise this woman. I totally despise this woman. But if these are the choices I'm given, I know where I'm voting. This is how bad it's gotten. I despise all the options.
You and I are going to have another conversation off air about this because Lou.
I know.
Lou, she has some mental.
Oh, God, yes.
Instability.
I told you, I despise her. She shot a dog. Because he couldn't be controlled.
No, that's not what she said. Let's get it right. She said he wasn't trainable.
He wasn't trainable.
And I'm thinking when she said that, now here's my humorous side, non-clinical, non-psychological. I said, well, for everyone that can't be trained, we should just shoot them all, right? I mean, what?
No, it's despicable.
It's like, oh, he wasn't trainable, so therefore he was no good. How many, what? Wait, back your truck up, lady. Yep. And I get that, there's this era of, not era, there's a generational pull for certain parts of the country and just the culture of the country where it's like this is what you do. It's
that's nobody's culture.
That's an excuse, and that's crap. That's like saying a 70-year-old is allowed to use the N-word just because they grew up in that time. No.
So here's the
thing. No. It's disrespectful. It's wrong. It's not okay. And no.
Here's the thing that really made this despicable for me.
First
of all, she did it. Right?
And then she was proud of it.
Then she put it in the book.
And she's proud of it.
She offered it up.
And she's proud of it.
Exactly. I know.
Proud.
Despicable.
Yeah. So I'm all set with that. So because if you think psychologically about that mindset, that tells you a lot about how she would treat people.
Oh God, yeah.
And so we in psychology very often go right to pathology comes in lots of forms, but we know there's hallmark signs of mental health issues when if you're hurting an animal and that's a hallmark front up, then you know that there's people that will be hurt, because if you can do that to an animal, you can do it to anybody.
Yep.
And that scares me. So she's because psychologically, not. And then you put that with anything that is paired with it that's not psychologically really stable. No. Did you see how I did that nicely?
I did.
That was good, right?
Yeah, and I'm not even coming back on it. But
just stop. No.
Yeah.
You cannot have.
No, the point was
you can't have major mental health issues running the White House.
Sure, you can. It's happened 100 times.
Okay, there's my words.
Major
mental health.
The last 3 presidents, major mental health issues.
No, this is okay. No, this is so bad.
Yes.
Out of the last 3, I'd give you 2. You have one that doesn't. You do not have one that has major mental health issues, and you have one that has aging-related health issues, and then you have one that's a complete narcissistic health issue, which is dangerous. Of all the 3 that you're mentioning,
okay. The one. All right.
Just keep dancing around the circle here. Because
the one you say is healthy isn't a narcissist. That's what you're telling me.
The one that I'm saying is the
one that is healthiest is not a narcissist.
No. Okay. How could you think he's a narcissist? How? Just give me. Do you even think? Are we talking about the same person?
Experienced him for 8 years. Yes.
He is not a narcissist. There's not one grain of narcissism in him that's beyond the normal, within normal limits, like you and me. We all have narcissism in us because we all have damages.
We have to move on at this point.
Oh, wow. Are you telling me what to do in my show?
No, I'm not telling you what to do.
Oh, you're having a hard time holding.
Yes.
Oh, well, then good.
Yeah.
It will be a practice for you in acceptance. This is good. I'm training you.
That's right.
So a full-blown narcissist that meets all the criteria and then falls off the chart and is like talking about being in the Third Reich, we might have a psychological problem, Lou. Yeah. You know, there's that. Just saying. I'm not wanting that to be a part of our culture because that, you know, is psychologically damaging. But nonetheless, we'll move on because
we have to move on.
We have to move on because you're about to burst, and also I don't do the politicking, and that is not okay. Well, it's okay, but it's fine. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, and I don't talk about it. So, except for here today because you brought it up.
No, the point I was trying to make is things have gotten so bad. This is where we are.
I don't want the woman from South Dakota.
I don't want her either.
Okay. Well, good for us. Okay, so ready to talk about what we're going to talk about today? This should get you going too. So okay. So I thought, well, first of all, I have more questions from people that are really good, but I'm going to tie it in, right, to a couple of things. So I have a very good friend who came to me last week and asked me something about an essential tremor.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to talk a little bit about essential tremors and what they are, because people have them.
Yep.
And I want to talk about that. But then I also wanted to get to a couple questions that I'm going to tie in that have to do with the polyvagal system, because it relates a little bit, sort of. But and feel free to jump in here at any time.
Sure.
But essential tremors, so what they are is when, you know, a lot of times people have like a little minor shake, like in their hand or in their voice or in their head, you know, you'll see it. You can have it in your 20s, you can have it in your 30s, you can have it in your 40s, whatever. If it hasn't been in your youth, like your youth, and you haven't had those things, then usually it's not genetically passed. But a lot of times it's a genetic pass through. So if you have it in your family and it came early and it wasn't ever diagnosed as anything else other than a tremor from early youth, then you likely have 50 to 70% of the time it's just a genetic pass. But if it's later in life, then people have to start thinking, okay, if I have a little essential tremor, let's look at all the options of what's going on. Because if it's something that is, one-sided, if it's only once in a while, if it's just one hand, are you having other symptoms? Like, there's lots of little things that you can do for rule outs. Now, the first big problem that people get afraid of is it's Parkinson's.
Yep.
As soon as you see a shake, you're like, oh God, is it Parkinson's? And I always tell people, let's go to that as the last resort, especially if you're in your 50s and 60s and early 70s, because, it could be, but, I have a couple patients that are in their early 60s who have had essential tremors, and it turned out to be Parkinson's. But we ruled out everything else first before we got to that, because there were other things, and it was really clear, which I had a feeling when they both had it, I was like, oh, yeah, they're both going to have Parkinson's. But so the genetic pass, if we know it's not that, I don't think that there's any in my friend to have this. A lot of times there's very specific reasons why. And one of the top reasons why I always look at first, and if you look on Dr. Google, in case you want to look this up, people, when we rule out as doctors, I always rule out, let's look at your medication list first.
Yeah.
Because medications very commonly will cause essential tremors, which is why they have all these commercials now for, if you have like tardive dyskinesia, which is basically a stiffening of the body, it can start with a little tremor and then it makes your body stiff. So if you're on things like, if you have a bipolar diagnosis and you have like Depakote, or a Depakote combination with lithium, or you're having a beta blocker that's in there that will cause those things, then you might have that. And if you get on them and that happens and you get off them really quickly, that can usually resolve itself out and go away. Now, if you have, it's a medication related issue, and it's usually related to, I often find it's usually related to someone being put on a beta blocker. So if you get on like a propranolol, or if you get on a variety of other things, it can cause an essential tremor. The longer you stay on it, the likelihood is that it will not go away. So you have to catch it quick enough, because once you've got it, it stays with you. That doesn't mean it will get worse, but you have to usually figure out if that is, because those types of things will cause that. Now, outside of that, there's a variety of other things that will cause essential tremors. And that usually in my field, I always look for how much anxiety causes essential tremors in a lot of people, because it's a neurological disconnect. That's important. Essential tremors are when a neurological disconnect. We don't know this absolutely for sure, but this is the best educated guess we have in our field. There's a disconnect neurologically between the cerebellum and the area of tremor, and so that's why the beta blockers hope to stop that. And so you get on it and it stops it. Now, once you're on it and it might stop it, they can always also create it.
Okay.
So it's, so if you didn't have it and then you did when you got on it, that's probably a good reason to get off of it. But you can't be on it too long, because if you're on it too long, then you've got it forever, because they don't resolve out. They're not curable in that way. So you want, if it's a medical induced thing, you want to get off of it right away and switch to something else. But the psychological factors that happen, anxiety, stress, like acute trauma to the brain or body, and that could be emotional. It doesn't have to be someone getting hit or having it could be something fearful. It could be just something like chronic stress over time building up and causing a GABA neuroreceptor, the anxiety receptor, being really depleted and really dehydrated in the body can cause the tremors. People get so anxious, you see them shake, shake, shake.
Yeah.
And then the more you talk about it, the more you think about it, usually the shake gets worse. Now that can happen with Parkinson's too. So you have to do many more other testing kind of things to get that to be clarified. But aside from that, caffeine and caffeine intake, and that's not just in drinks. You have to monitor your caffeine if you see it in foods, Oftentimes things are spiked now with foods because people want caffeine boost. So they'll eat it in their protein bars. They'll put it in there, or they'll put it in like a protein shake, or they'll, for extra boost. So you have to be really mindful of reading your labels to know, are you getting extra or more of these caffeine boost shots? Because that will cause it. And the older you are, the more likely that will cause it, because the cerebellum, we think the cerebellum will disconnect from those body parts to cause that if you have stress, caffeine, even minor consumption. And I always revel in this, because I always think, when you're the lay person thinking you have to be a big drinker to have like tremors. You've seen people who are in the ism, right? Yeah. If they're in the ism stage, you can always tell a drinker when they're either in recovery and whatever, they have the essential tremors. You can usually see it. Or if they're in full alcoholism or big drinkers, they're abusing the alcohol and they don't want to admit they're in ism, they will have a shake. And it's usually the eyes. You'll see the eyes do that back and forth, or you'll see the hands shake. And then after a drink or two, it will sort of simmer out, but then it comes back because the body is sort of relying on that to keep them going. But it's usually very minimal. So in cases where you just have no Parkinson's and straight essential tremors, it's that psychological piece of anxiety, medication, stress, fatigue. People who are heavily fatigued and get poor sleep are essential tremor candidates, because the body isn't repairing itself. So it starts to have shake. And then what do people do? They use caffeine to stay. So you're compounding the problem and making it way worse than it needs to be. There's also disease. If you have some sort of you could have a cancer, you could have something else. Those are the really rare things that people would have a reason to have that. It's
Dr. I have Google. Option number 4 is always cancer.
Or death, right?
Yeah.
So there are things out there that certainly can cause it, but there's so much more on the rare list. I don't usually talk about them with my patients, because when people come in for, I'm having a tremor, I go right down let's see what your medications are. Usually there's a medication that's hitting the list that's usually let's see if we can get off that to see if it makes a difference. And then, a lot of times, and you and I've talked about this before, people will be on multiple medications for the same exact thing. And I always am like, why are we doing this? Now, that doesn't mean that, people who have high blood pressure, for instance, often have to have a dualing communicating medication, like hydrochlorothiazide and losartan, or hydrochlorothiazide and lisinopril. And I think a year or so ago, I mentioned that lisinopril, especially in men, can cause an increase in fatigue, an increase in libido problems, an increase in depletion of certain vitamins. Mm-hmm. So then it changes other parts of the body. So then you have other issues going on. So I'm not a big lisinopril fan. It also causes a cough. It's really like a deep coughing from a smoker.
Yeah.
And it's painful. And as soon as you get off lisinopril, it stops. So I'm not a big fan of that one. So losartan is a much better one. So usually I try to make sure, okay, if my patients have high blood pressure, losartan and hydrochlorothiazide are usually the go-to. I usually do this in combination with my colleague who's the provider who's prescribing. And then usually at that point, unless it's really, really bad, I try to stay away from adding in another cardiac protector because it can cause tremor. Mm-hmm. So because you're trying so hard to keep the blood pressure at a certain level. By the way, did I mention that I was at 206? Did I mention my blood pressure when I was in the hospital was 206 over 100 and something?
Yep.
Yeah. Then it was 190 or something. I just had that come in my head going, yeah, that was really high.
Did you know?
When they told me.
Yeah, because
but I did
was
not
high blood pressure to the point where I went to urgent care for something else.
And then they
something small. And it's like, we don't want to let you home. You should go to emergency room, because my blood pressure was so high. No symptoms. I didn't know. It's when I first discovered this.
Yes. Well, and that's usually what happens with most people, because it's either you don't know or you're in full-blown heart attack.
Yeah.
Or stroke.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't know. It's hard to pick up sometimes, and female symptoms of that can be very different than male. Stroke, no, but heart attack, yes. Which is why I thought I was having a heart attack the day that I went into the emergency room the first time when I drove myself there with my heart attack symptoms.
Good strategy.
Which everyone was like, "You drove yourself?" I'm like, "I did."
Yep.
Dun, 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 dun.
No.
You know me, I have to do things on my own.
Yep.
If you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. A quote from Gary Oldman,
I guess,
in Fifth Element.
Yeah.
If you have to, and then he ends up getting blown up. But nonetheless, he didn't do it right. But so I got sidetracked. God.
So be careful of your medications, especially combining medications.
So when you're on combined medications for blood pressure, this is one of the areas where I'm always concerned about with people with essential tremors, is because the medications are often treating the blood pressure, but the blood pressure has to do with anxiety and stress. So that's why I always put them together and say, okay, let's assess how much anxiety you have. Where can we cut back? How can we have better Zen and more chill moments and really understanding our bodies? Because if you are taking an extra medication that's wrapping around the cardiac issue, which also protects cholesterol, oftentimes it's like a cholesterol blocking medication that's also lower blood pressure that works sort of in tandem, that can cause an essential tremor, and nobody tells you that.
Yeah.
I will tell you that as a naturopath, as a mental health nutritionist certified, I will tell you that those things happen. So there are other drugs out there that are beta blockers, like propranolol. Propranolol works really great at lowering your stress level. However, it's a floor liquor. So
what does that mean?
So I call it the floor liquor because it works really. It's not, you don't have to take it every day. It doesn't have to accumulate in your body. But it basically, when you take it at night, it hits you really hard, makes you have good sleep, get good rest. But if you take it at 11 o'clock at night and you're up at 7 or 8 or earlier, it hasn't had time to really push through your body, and you get up and you're like, right? Yeah. So I always tell my patients, I have a couple of patients taking it right now because they're experimenting with their doc and me of how to get some of this under control. I've backed them up and had them start taking it at 7. So by the time they wake up at 5:30, it's pretty resolved out of them. Yeah. Because, it's just bringing.
What do they feel like at 9 o'clock?
They're usually fine. Yeah. It's usually like, it just gets you into that nice rest state. But if you wanted to lay down and go to bed, you could, because it would knock you out. Right. And you don't have to be on a ton, but they work really well. But the problem is they have this side effect. And I hate it when people have to have side effects, because then what happens is that masks, medication masks the problem.
Yep.
So, we want to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to. And so when you have something like that put on board, it might take the essential tremor down and it's band-aiding it. But then if we took it away, the essential tremor comes back. And so then what is the essential tremor? It comes back to, well, what is it? So if you have high blood pressure and you're having an essential tremor on the 2 medications I mentioned, for instance, that are really common, okay, then we have to look at, okay, what neurologically is disconnecting in the cerebellum? And so you have to do neuropsych testing on that. You have to do a variety of different things to really try to understand whether or not it's anything else, and Parkinson's. Yeah. The other thing is physicality. Oftentimes people get essential tremors if they have been in drug addiction and they have numbness, like people who have cocaine addiction who have been long-termers. They'll get numbness in like their arm someplace or one part of their leg, and then they'll have a tremor, or they'll have like a numbness with like a weird, it's not a constant shake, but they'll have like a quick trember.
Right.
Because it's like they can't feel that twitch, part, but they'll have like a twitch that will last for a few seconds. So there's one other thing that I don't believe my friend has that issue. So I don't think that that's an issue.
No.
I'm just saying, my friends, so I'm thinking you would know if they had that or not. I'm thinking that's not an issue. But the other big thing that I'd look for is there any recent trauma of lifting something, straining something, pinching a nerve, sleeping wrong, and then having something happen where your hands are tremoring or your arm is tremoring. And that being it. So there's a variety of different things that could be going on, but essentially when it's a tremor, it's always going to be linked back to some kind of disconnect in the cerebellum to the body part talking to it. Now, so I'm thinking for my friend that it's likely the medication that they're on needs to be moved off of this one thing that causes essential tremors. Even though it stops them, it can actually create them. And then also the fact that they might have a pinched nerve, or they've strained something somewhere in their upper region because they're having a hand tremor in only one side. So usually, now this is the other thing, if the left hand is tremoring, it's likely that the damage going on is on the right side. So it's going to be contralateral.
Oh,
so
interesting.
And that doesn't always have to be the way it is, but it's like when you wake up with a stiff neck and it's on your left, and patients will come in and be like, my neck is stiff on my left side. I'm like, oh, it's your right side that it has the problem. They're like, look at me like, what? And I'm like, well, you're stiff here because something happened over here and we need to loosen up this side to get this one to release. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, yeah. But they're like, but this side, I'm like, it's locked up because something happened over here. And usually that's like sleep, turn wrong. It's kind of like bending over and all of a sudden you wrenched your back. You can't move for 10 days.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So it's a very similar thing. So, but essential tremors can be really scary because if you haven't had them in your youth, that's genetic and you're just going to have, they don't really get much worse. They just kind of stay the same and you jump. But in your older age and you get there, you start thinking, oh God, Parkinson's.
Late onset. Yeah.
And late onset, 60s, 65 is like, it casts, we have to do a rule out for Parkinson's. And there's been great research done on that, thanks to Michael J. Fox Foundation and the Parkinson's Foundation, which Michael J. Fox is essentially funded for most of the drugs. And look at how long a life, because he was early onset, he was in his late 20s, I believe.
I think so.
And now he's 60 something. So he's been with Parkinson's for a long time, and seemingly doing very well. But he also had all the trial drugs and all the stuff that was coming up. But that would be the biggest concern is Parkinson's, but really not getting to Parkinson's first before we rule out that. But if you're going to a specialist, like a neurologist, and people were asking me, like, who do you go to? You go to a neurologist, you go to a neuropsych person, a neuropsychologist, and a neuropsychiatrist.
Really?
Neuropsychologists are going to do the testing.
Okay.
Neuropsychiatrists
will do the prescriptions.
Are doing either prescriptions and or doing surgery. Because sometimes if it's seen that there's a nerve issue or something that's dislodged and pressing against something else, there's surgery. And it also depends on if there's a brain issue going on, there's also surgery. So rare. But those are the two that you would typically go to. And there's a lot of really great specialists, and we're in Boston, so there's some really good ones. I have a client that is a performer, like a musician, pretty famous, and he goes and he has essential tremors, and he goes to a specialized
as a musician. Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Just it's recent, so and more likely Parkinson's than not. So, but they're doing that, and they're doing like the PTOT for like voice shake and keeping his body able to stay in condition to still be able to play and sing and do all those things, so that's not noticeable. And that's what I noticed, that unless you have like a hoarseness in your voice or you're having cracking in your voice, because it doesn't come, essential tremors that are Parkinsonian usually come with a variety of other symptoms. It's not usually just the essential tremor. Even in the beginning, you'll start seeing like, you'll get a cough, you'll get dry throat, you'll get like a hoarseness, your voice will go up, especially men, it will go into that higher range and then drop back down. So I don't know if my friend has any of that. I just know that they have just the regular sort of like that little faint little tremor. So I wanted to put that person, if they're listening to it, some ease that it's probably not as bad as one would think, because you go right to the, oh God, it's Parkinson's. It could be just a medication issue with some stress. And I know this person is very stressed out a lot of the time, and they are probably fatigued.
How do we
sleep wrong and sleep poorly, and then it's adding to the problem.
How do we gauge problematic stress? Because we're all in fight and flight all the time. We're all in distress.
I think it's how you're managing it. So gauging it, it's hard to gauge. Everybody's like, yours and mine could be, we both could say we're under stress, but how do we gauge whose is more? It's more about how are we dealing with it? How are you eating right? Are you sleeping, like, because eating will exacerbate it, certain things, sleeping poorly or sleeping wrong, right? Going to bed anxious, going to bed under stressful circumstances, not really, you and I talk about shutting down at night, but do you really shut down? Are you able to really shut down? Does it really get peaceful and quiet?
Challenging sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
It was so weird last night. Speaking of, I had it, how you have those dreams sometimes where there's something like really bad, but you can't get out. Like, I had one of those last night, and it was like, it was awful. Like, I couldn't unlock it. It was terrible.
Yeah.
So I think that it's in the acceptance of maybe having to do more. And even when you think you're doing more, I think meditation, I really wish people would get into meditation more and stop being so caught up in the hocus pocus that they think it is, and thinking it's somehow, anti a religion, or it's being mindful. It's being a normal human being, getting in touch with yourself. It has nothing to do with religion or politics. It has to do with everything related to just being there for yourself and taking good care of yourself in that moment. And it's hard for people because people say they don't have time. And I always say, if you have time to sit down and watch 25 minutes of something or the game, you got time to be mindful. And I will have people say, well, watching the game is decompressing. Not when like you're my friend Kristen, who's watching the Bruins screaming at the TV and saying to me it's relaxing to her when I can hear her 6 miles away.
Yeah.
And she's like screaming. I'm like, this is not relaxing.
But that can come in different forms other than cross-leg with incense.
Yes.
A walk can be meditative.
Well, so that's the thing is, it's meditation in my book is not cross-legging and doing Om and having incense and sitting in a dark room with a Buddha statue. That is a fallacy of bullshit of what it's supposed to be. That's one type of very specific type of meditation. Meditation is go for a walk in nature, be at peace, listening to music for 5 minutes. Sit with yourself in the morning, wake up in bed, be quiet, and just think about, what am I going to do good today? What am I going to have fun doing today? Not about what usually people wake up is they wake up and then go, oh, shit. Right?
And right back into it.
Right back into it. Yeah. Right. So you go from sleep anxiety, which you have in your sleep, and then you wake up and you're like, oh, here we go. Right? Like so I won't tell my specific anxiety, but I get a little anxiety. On occasion, like I go in and I hate checking my mailbox at work because I'm not a big fan of insurance companies because they're a lot of work and they create many hours of work for me. So I have a increased anxiety when I go in and I walk around the corner to my mailbox and I look, and if I see like a big stack, I'm like, this is either really good or this is really bad. Right. And bad meaning it's going to be extra work for me.
More fight. Yeah.
It's going to be more fight on the phone, more paperwork. Because there was a security breach, just so in case you all didn't know this, there was a massive security breach in everybody's data information last year that affected all, to my understanding, all insurance carriers to the point where they shut down. You can't even call Blue Cross because they say, due to the cybersecurity issue, we're not answering the telephone because they had so many. Yeah. You can't do anything online. I've had to handwrite old school the HCFA forms on every single person. And if you miss one dot, one letter, one whatever, they kick back and you have to do them all over.
Wow.
Every time. And I do so many of them on a weekly, 75, 80 of them. If I get 5 or 10 or 15 back, which I've gotten really good at doing this, I now get maybe a couple back a week. It's exhausting because you're doing the ones you're already doing, and then you have to go back and redo, and you have to make sure they're on timely filing, because then if you don't, then they don't pay. So those are the kinds of things that I'm like, I walk around the corner, look at my mailbox and go, please God, have no errors, on a daily. But anyway, so that brings me, any other thoughts that you wanted to talk about on essential tremors?
Meditation. Well, it was more about meditation because I think people get overwhelmed by the term meditation. Yes. I think you should think of it in terms of just setting things down for a while. My bonus daughter, I'm so proud of her. She has such anxiety issues, but she goes to work and she schedules 15 minutes for TikTok before work.
That's good for
her.
Like,
yeah.
Right.
It's like, that's perfect. Take 15 minutes and set everything down for a while.
Exactly.
And just, take it off your shoulders and set it down. You can pick it up later.
Right. And
nothing's changing.
And I think that when people don't take that time for themselves, it's a big problem.
But that's a good skill set, because you take 5 minutes. And then it goes to take 20 minutes or take your walk for 40 minutes.
And people will criticize that she's doing TikTok. But if that's what gives her relief, it doesn't matter. I'm like, who cares if it's TikTok? My feed for TikTok is kitties and puppies and stupid memes and Karen videos. You know, the Karen videos, like women screaming at someone for doing something wrong and me laughing because it's just so ridiculous. It makes me happy. I'm like, oh, there we go. And then I do that. And then like I'm at peace with myself because I giggle going, wow, there's a lot of crazy and I don't need to do that.
Just take the load and set it down.
Exactly. So in this vein, so moving from meditation, we can come back if you would like to. But okay, so I have questions.
Yes.
And so this was related to going back to when we talked about the polyvagal. I'm fine, but I'm trying to hold my phone up. It goes back to the polyvagal system I talked about a while ago. The polyvagal system is the regulatory system that it's the nerve bundle that connects between your brain and your stomach, and it regulates multiple systems, right, in your body, and it's around your neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine. It's like talking, it's sending the messages, the mind-body connection. If you go back to a few shows ago, I talked about it. But out of that, when we talk about essential tremors, when we talk about the polyvagal regulating you, it's about emotional regulation. So your essential tremors, as you've seen probably people, like if they start talking about things and they're essentially tremoring, all of a sudden the tremor can get worse. Yeah. Why? Because the focus is there. Why? Because you're dysregulating you're unregulating your polyvagal nerve, and now it's talking from your brain to your stomach and signaling back and forth anxiety. It's dumping cortisol. It's making you start having adrenal gland, your adrenaline starts to rush, your hypothyroid, your thyroid can change. Like, so it moves, and people don't realize that's what
set off an alarm.
That's what mind-body connection is that you're constantly talking. It's not that whole, like, again, going back to the old school thought of what is meditation, of like mind-body connection. Well, if you don't have your brain and your body talking, you don't live, you're not functioning. So you have to connect to them. They're always going. So one of the questions that came in, I have 3 here, and they're a 3-parter that go together. So here's the first part. I thank you to the lovely person who wrote this, because it's a really well articulated question. And I first want to say that because I appreciate these and it's helpful. When chronic emotional trauma causes dysfunction of the polyvagal system and damage to the hippocampus and amygdala, can this cause issues with memory? What a beautiful question.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So let me break it down. First of all, this person's asking, if you have emotional trauma that's long time, chronic, overexposure, tons of it or whatever, and it causes dysfunction. We know that chronic emotional trauma does cause dysfunction of the polyvagal system. It does. We know that we know through scans, we know through testing, we know through anecdotal reports, we know through objective testing. We know that when you have emotional trauma, or you live in a traumatic house, or you live in an abusive house, or if you live in like wartime, or you're dysregulating that system of communication, because you're essentially always in fight or flight. You're in alarm state, right? And it does cause damage. We know that people who live, and you can see this if you go to TikTok, actually, there's a lot of these, and there's some pretty legit ones because I have vetted them out because people ask me about this stuff. So I spent a lot of time doing research on these things. But the hippocampus is part of your limbic system, which is your emotional center in the brain. It's made up of 3 areas: your hippocampus, which is your memory and learning; your amygdala, which is like your aggression, agitation, assertiveness, that all the A's I always call it. Remember, amygdala A's, like agitation, anxiety, those kinds of things. And then you have your hypothalamus, and that's your one that regulates your sex drive, your eating, your drinking, and your temperature, right? So when you have the polyvagal system become unregulated because you have chronic distress and it's traumatizing you. So I'm going to give you an example. If you're living in a narcissistic house where there's a lot of push, good morning, Catherine, where there's a lot of push against, here it comes. I can see it coming now. Catherine, ask relevant questions. I love you. When she wants to go into psych, she just told me yesterday she wants to go to college for psych. That will change in 4 seconds, but nonetheless. But she's going to follow on Auntie's footsteps. Good morning, Blondie. Be careful, my dear Ginger. So I have to warn her. When this causes issues with memory, it's because this is such a deep answer for so many ways. But the simple answer is when we have the hippocampus and the amygdala in the limbic system being touched by trauma over and over again, it actually, we can see it on functional MRIs. We can see the damages of being exposed to those traumas.
Really?
And you can see the areas light up in the brain. Just like if you have someone who's been at war, or you see a first responder who's seen a lot of things like an EMT, a person who is a police officer, a fire person, emergency room docs and nurses, trauma centers, people who have one-time experiences without the chronicity has that experience. The hippocampus and the amygdala get fired up. And so it causes emotional distress. I went looking for my glasses on top of my head. It causes emotional distress and causes issues with memory in the way that the memory gets impaired in such a way that it's because the body and the mind become disorganized of how to make meaning and sense out of something because it's in such heightened alert.
Right.
So it's losing its ability on multiple fronts to retain, store, convert, integrate like a normal, typical way of functioning. So when that happens, the memory center because the polyvagal nerve isn't able, essentially, I'm loosely saying this, isn't able to really connect in its fullest capacity to the systems because the emotional centers are damaged. Because we know that people who live in like narcissistic, abusive homes have damage to their brain. We see this more and more. And so that's one of the things, like when people talk about domestic violence or people who live in emotionally abusive environments and grow up in that, kids are really resilient. But there's been more and more research on how in depth the damage really is and how do you repair from that, and how, resiliency protects kids from that. But when you're an adult and you're having that and you're living in that, it's very difficult to repair because it's, brain is already formed and it's not able to resiliently neuroplasticity wise make its comeback. So it's a little bit harder. Okay, so so that causes issues with memory for sure. So there's the first question. Second question of this is it common to experience this dynamic in a workplace environment? So that was a little bit looser of a question. So I'm interpreting this question as, is it common to experience memory issues and the hippocampus being damaged and so on in a workplace environment? Yes, of course. If you have someone, or you have, people gaslighting you, people who are undermining you, people who don't have your back and are not doing teamwork, if it's a lot of abusive, turning it into more of a feminist psychology position. Women have been dealing with this forever in the workplace. It's just fact. It's not like speculative. It's, women have had to deal with chronic stress and chronic disconnection of the polyvagal system because you're always being put down, or one man down because you're not a man, for instance. That's like a big one. There's another section of it of like, there's an assumption. I always go back to, one of the people I was with this weekend, on my weekend, she and I were traveling last year on a cruise, and we had showed up at a beach off the cruise, and we were in the water waiting and picking up shells off the bottom and doing whatever we were doing. And a couple started talking to us and like asked us what we did. And I won't go into the details of some of it because inappropriately I don't need to, or appropriately I don't need to, but they asked what she did and she said it. And then the man asked me what I did for a living, and I told him. And long story short about that, it was just like I said, oh, I'm a doctor and whatever. But before I got to that point, his wife, she literally, if you could have seen in a movie, she went down under the water. She was so embarrassed because the assumption that was made speaks to this question about the workplace, and how if you don't have resiliency, the damage that can be done to someone. Before I told him what I did for a living, after my friend said what she did, if she was listening, she'd be laughing. He went, when I said, hey, and I do this and I work for these particular people, he goes, oh, are you their interior decorator? And I turned to my friend Kathy, and she smiled at me and sort of was like, oh God, I don't know what you're going to say.
Yep.
And I said, no. And so I said, what made you say that? And he, much to his wife's mortification, said, well, because you're like a pretty woman, and that's what pretty women do.
Oh, God.
And I was like, so I waited, because now it was like, it's like the spider pulling into the web.
Yeah.
And I went, no, I'm their doctor. And he was like, I could see his face go from, and his wife was like, I'm so sorry.
Really?
Yeah, she was.
Public apology?
Oh, yeah. And then she pulled him away from us, like, and pulled him out into the deeper water. And I'm like, he's about to die. And then about 10 minutes later, Kathy and I were standing up at the front, like towards the beginning of the beach. And he came up and he goes, I just would like to really apologize to you, because I would like to survive in my house, that I am so stupid. And so it was very funny. But that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not in the work environment, but imagine being in a work environment where that's the constant culture, and you're fighting that culture of, well, because you're female. And I'm using this as just an example. Because you're female, this is the way it is. Or because, very predominant right now, because you're gay, there's this thing. Or because you're this, or because you're that. You're under this exposure constantly of trauma. And if it's emotional trauma, which that is, because you're constantly having to fight to... You have to play the political game. You have to be able to be respectful. You can't cross the line because you can't get fired, but you have to stand up for yourself and advocate. Like, it's a lot of work. And so for some people that don't have as great a resiliency as some other people, it can be very traumatizing. And therefore, as a result of the trauma, it can be unnerving, and it can damage the brain. And many workplaces are like that. So to this person's question, is it common to experience this dynamic in a work environment? I think that I don't do as much IO, which is industrial organizational psych, as I used to. I used to go into companies a lot. I do it once in a while now, but I get hired in to come in and do like a revamp of the company and the dynamic of the hierarchy and change it around. That's one of the reasons why it pays beautifully, but the work that to be done is so intense, because there's so much backlash from the way things are, because people don't want to move that specific dynamic, because it loses them control. But yet the people who are under the control, there's no better word to put it. The control is just like the abusive home.
Yep.
So it's in that thing. So it's dysregulating the polyvagal system. It creates trauma. It makes an imprint on the brain, changes the brain activity, and changes the way that we are functional. Right.
Plus, there's only so much RAM, right? If you're processing stress, you have less RAM
you don't
for
have
storage.
The capacity, and you don't have the capacity to do the job in the same way. You make mistakes, or you are fatigued, or you miss something, or you misquote, miscalculate, whatever it is, or you get stressed out and snap and be angry, or be agitated, or be flip.
In sports, we call it slowing the game down.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If your game is speeded up, you don't function all that well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is the wrap-in question. The third question that this person asked, and they say, because if you remember, the first one was, when chronic emotional trauma causes dysfunction, can this cause issues with memory? Right. So he says, if one is true, that question, after doing emotional work like therapy, will the damaged areas, this is such a great question, will the damaged areas recover and more easily recall forgotten or blocked memories? First part of that question. Such a great question. So I'm going to answer that first.
Ooh.
Isn't that a beautiful question?
Yeah. So are the memories stored and unreachable, or are they not stored?
Right. So because are they forgotten or blocked?
Right.
Right. So yes. So after doing emotional work, so after doing some therapy, the damaged areas will recover potentially, no guarantee, but they will potentially recover, can potentially recover. And I wouldn't say it would, I wouldn't use the word more easily recall, but have a better ability to recall forgotten information, because if you release from the emotional stress of the issues, you're likely to be able to unblock or not forget and bring back to the surface memories that were there, because you don't have the guard up anymore to have to compartmentalize or protect yourself from those things. But that's not a guarantee. So I can say, yes, it can, but yes, it might not as well. So
Yep.
it's right. And the second part of his question on that, if one is true, may they remain blocked and someone will more easily remember day-to-day affairs from time of recovery onward. So that's a great question.
Yeah.
So that question is, if you're doing therapy, will the things that already have been blocked stay blocked? And that basically from the therapy point on, while you're moving forward, then your day-to-day affairs will just be easily remembered because you're doing work, so that it won't get like stuck. And then from time of recovery onward, you're going to be healthy and not stuck in a chronic melee of the stuff that's been created around you from the trauma or from the chronic emotional distress. So I would say, one, there's good research on this out there if you want to look it up, but there's also, from my now going into 29 years here shortly of working, I think that some things will remain blocked just because, and that doesn't mean blocked as in fully. It means that the details, like you know the incident or the incidences, but you might not remember all the details. And until someone might say, oh, remember this? And you're like, oh yeah, or I don't have a recollection of that. But someone will more easily remember kind of like the everyday things, as long as they're not sitting in the emotional trauma or the emotional environment that's really stressful as you're doing the work going forward. I know that there was a period of time where I was working in a volunteer position, in a philanthropic volunteer position, and I was one of the board of directors. Mm-hmm. And I'm mindfully choosing words because I know some of the people on this board listen to this. It became, I resigned, I quit, because it became so toxic that it was making me ill thinking about going to the meeting, because there was so much toxicity, not at me, but just watching what was going on. I knew that it was going to get worse, and I was not going to be able to function in it without speaking up, which I knew then would draw me into their melee. And so I said, I gracefully don't have time for this particular thing anymore. And I did it very gracefully and got out. And the relief was like melting butter off my body, because it was creating trauma, and I knew it was creating trauma. And not to say it's like trauma from war, but it was creating emotional brain trauma where I was upsetting, like my body was upset, my body was tense, I felt ill, and that's not who I am.
And for everyone out there who needs to hear it, that's okay.
And right.
Yeah.
And that was, it was about a 3-month decision to make the decision finally, because I kept going to the meetings going, it will get better. It will get better. It didn't get better. And even with little bits and pieces, I'm very diplomatic. I know how to do this room. I know how to work this room. But there were such more, I want to say evil, toxic evil forces at the helm. And it was really supposed to be an egalitarian helm, but they took it upon themselves to become dictator, ruler, chief, all the things.
It was a homeowners association.
Yeah.
That's basically what it turned into.
Yeah, speaking of that homeowners association, he's leaving.
There you go.
There's an update. I'll give you some more on that.
Can I ask you a question about memory?
Yes.
I used to do a show with a psychiatrist who was also big into.
Yes, you remind me daily of how amazing his show was.
It was. It's great.
Yeah, you should do that work for my show.
As yours.
That was very good.
Yeah,
that was good. Good suck up.
He was also into hypnosis.
Yes.
kind of as a hobby at first, but he got into it deeply, and he was working with police departments, state police departments, doing witnesses.
Yes.
And it was about accessing memories, and he was telling me stories about being able to, under hypnosis, someone would walk through. What are you doing?
I'm working out.
I'm not taking that personally at all.
I know. If you can't see me, I'm listening to you.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I got a pain in my shoulder from the air bubble that they've still got in me. They told me it's taken a month, and all of a sudden, it got really painful. So I'm doing arm circles while you're talking, and you're looking at me like, "What are you doing?" Sorry, I'm listening. Go ahead.
But they would talk to witnesses, and under hypnosis, they would recall details that they didn't have handy. In other words, they couldn't recall outside of hypnosis.
Yes.
How much do we store, and how much of that is accessible?
So that's a little bit different of a question from what we were talking about today.
Well, kind of, but yeah.
But I mean, it's related, but because there's some parts that I'd have to address, which this would be a great show to talk about it. But so hypnosis for recall in cases like that has a lot of controversy around it, because we have repressed memory syndrome. We have compartmentalization. We have, is a person really able to be hypnotized and give you details or not? Like, so to answer your question, it's not like an easy answer.
Yeah.
It's not as admissible in court as we would think, because it has a lot of loose ability. We can't, there's so many pieces to that. It's hard to answer the question because there's so many different pieces that may or may not skew the quality of the reporter or the quantity of information that comes from the reporter and how the person gets interviewed. If he was consistent and he's the consistent administrator of the hypnosis and getting the recounts, then that would make it better knowledge, better information. But we do have people that are very difficult to hypnotize.
Yeah.
And hypnosis
I can't be hypnotized.
Huh?
I can't be hypnotized.
Right.
On a couple of shows they've tried, and I can't.
So,
it doesn't work.
And that's because many people won't let go of their control to be put. You don't fall asleep. You're just going into a meditative state that's beneath the consciousness. So you're still awake, but it lets you allow yourself to go to a place where you can retrieve information potentially.
In a couple instances specifically, he was, and this was I found these interesting because they were verifiable information. In other words, he came up with license plates that they already had.
Right.
Just verifying information. And it's just interesting to me that we walk by a car in a mall parking lot and pull a license plate out.
Yeah.
But I could never pull that out of my memory.
Right.
Normally.
Right.
But do we store that stuff?
So we do pay attention to a lot of different things that we don't realize that we're paying attention to. And so we can pull that, which is why they do hypnosis in a lot of these cases, because you can get some pretty accurate information and this is what makes it more credible, is when you have corroborating information. Right. That's when it works really well. A lot of times we don't have corroborating information in forensics in those ways. And so then it's harder, but I mean, they explore it. They'll get like a whole 2 or 3 hour tape of someone reporting, and then they'll go chase down all those leads and all the things just to exhaust it. And I don't know what the statistical hit rate on that is. I have a friend that does forensic psychology and talks to me about that stuff all the time. And he's amazing because that's what he loves. He's written books about it. He's written like actual novels with the Efron sister who did When Harry Met Sally. Like, he's done some beautiful things with it, but
yet not on the show.
Huh?
Yet not on the show.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'll work on him. Yeah. I will work on him. I didn't even think of him, but I can work on getting him on. He'd be fascinating. Actually, you'd like him a lot. But we've talked about, making it, because it has to have the credibility. It's kind of like a polygraph. Polygraph, you can, you're not detected whether or not you're lying or not. You're detected on your body rate changing because you get change in body temperature and heart rate, and it's measuring that ability and shows potentially whether you're being deceitful or not. A lot of times polygraphs, people say you failed, but you didn't necessarily always fail because you lied. You failed because you're holding back, or you're getting nervous because you feel like you can't give the full information. And that's because you're embarrassed sometimes. It doesn't mean you're criminal. But that's why they're not admissible in court, because
you
fail, but then they're not necessarily a fail.
Ryan asked a great question. Would the unconscious unearthing of memories through hypnosis have more or less filtering through an emotional lens? Maybe it's person dependent. And some of this stuff is your own reality. You think you saw something, so you create a reality. But like I said, we were talking about more verifiable information like a license plate. But we all have our own reality, perception of what we see, what we saw.
So to, I'm going to start coughing now. Hold on.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So to Ryan's question and to what you just said, I'm going to kind of combine it.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons why we have a hard time with eyewitness testimony.
Yeah.
Eyewitness testimony is controversial all the time.
Hypnosis or not.
Hypnosis or not,
right.
Because, and that's why I'm starting with this first, because it goes to the answer to his question. Eyewitness testimony, people will constantly think that they've seen things that they haven't, because they build in a narrative really quickly around the things that they've seen. I can tell you this, when I've interviewed people, I've not done this in a while, when I've interviewed people for this, and I've done forensic work, or I've had to interview kids for things, or teenagers, the more information that's given, the less reliable. As soon as they start telling me about every possible detail, I know my person is not a good candidate for testifying. Typically, because it's usually going to be wrong or pretty off the mark, right? It's when people give me vaguer and a couple good pieces of information, and then they're corroborated with other people who are similar. The more detailed the story, it's usually a created narrative that they believe, absolutely, but it's been created about that. And you can see there's good experimental videos that you can get on YouTube that are actual psychological sound, well done videos of these experiments being done over time. Of like, was the person wearing a red jacket or a blue jacket? Red jacket. What was actually beige, right? So it's you're implanting information, right. And so it really depends on that. So to his question, would the unconscious, so if you unearth memories through hypnosis, have more or less filtering? Are they pure? Yeah. So this is why hypnosis is important from someone who's really good at doing it and who has no bias. So I don't practice hypnosis on people. I've done some training in it and I can do it. I don't like doing it because I just don't like doing it. Okay. And I don't find a lot of usefulness in it. But it is filtered many times and through the lens of someone who wants to be helpful. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can tell that a person I think I can tell usually if a person's feigning the information. Yeah. And they seem like, that they're hypnotized when in fact I've watched things that they're telling me or the people I'm with that they think we want to hear. Yep. And so
what they want to hear,
or that what they want to hear. Yeah. And also because people are so inclined to be wanting to be helpful or in the spotlight. We have so many pieces of this, especially when they're high profile cases. I've worked on a few high profile thingies and years ago. And people want to be famous. They want their 5 minutes of fame. So
Ryan's they want to have relevant testimony.
Right. So Ryan's question has a lot of pieces to it because on merit of just the question, it can have more or less filtering based on the emotional lens of the person's agenda.
Yep.
And it is person dependent because it's based on their agenda. And that doesn't mean it's a bad agenda. It could be a good agenda. A person who wants to really help will supply a lot of information. A person who really wants to help sometimes can't supply a lot, but they give us enough that gives us enough to get what we need. So it's really, yes, and it's dependent. Good psychology, right?
Not more or less, but different.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's not pure, which is why hypnosis, you have to be really careful with like repressed memories, regression. That's why, when I do stuff with little kids, sexual assaults or sexual abuse on little kids, it's so specific how we sit with kids and talk to them, and no leading on and no leading questions, and no, it's more like, and what do you remember? It's never like, and you don't ever lead with the words of anything that would, it's all, and what happened then, Do you remember what they looked like? Do you remember if it was a male or female? You can do like basics like that, but you don't, you don't go into anything else. But most of the time when I've seen really, really good hypnosis, when I've seen it done really significantly competent and has a good outcome, is the examiner. And I am not one of them because I love learning from them, but I'm not a hypnosis expert by any means. Watching the beautiful sort of artwork that comes out of it, because you just wouldn't think this one little question was going to get anything, and all of a sudden it just triggers the person's memory, and then you get in hypnosis a detail thing is good.
Yeah.
When a person's just giving a recounting of an eyewitness testimony, it's a hit or miss.
Yeah.
Because you're just like, especially when you know the information of some of it that because you're privy to it, and then they're giving you exact opposite, and you're sitting there going, I have to finish this interview knowing fully well that this person's so off the mark, but they so badly want to be involved.
Let me change Ryan's question a little bit.
Okay.
Because my big kick lately is I've been working on is basically the concept of preferred conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And people work from preferred conclusion a lot. They don't
of course
try to arrive at a conclusion. They try to arrive at their conclusion.
Right. Well, that's a human phenomenon.
Exactly.
Right.
So in hypnosis, are you less likely to work towards your preferred conclusion than you are when?
So I could say yes, but I could say there are certainly cases that I have seen or been involved in where people will work towards their preferred conclusion because they have skin in the game.
Yeah.
So
fair enough.
Again, depends.
Yeah.
And sometimes
that runs deeper than hypnosis.
Right. And sometimes
yeah.
and it's obvious that there's skin in the game. And sometimes you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes you can see it and it's clear. And sometimes you have to, investigator to investigator or clinician to clinician. You have to be like, when you're rewatching tape, because we usually tape them or we have audio tape,
yep.
We have to really listen for it and be like, and mark it. So that if I've never had to do any expert testimony on anything hypnotic. I've consulted on things, but not had to be an expert on it. And I've had a few of me and another clinician or two have been like, oh, there's a huge question mark. And that's where you're going to get flagged, like a court case. They're going to, because they can hear it too. It's like a layman's thing. It's like, wait a second, this is what's been said. And is that really true? And you have to say, I can't say without speculating,
yeah.
There's reasonable doubt here that could or could not be true. And that no case of whoever's got the side they want it on, nobody wants to hear that.
Right.
So they try to get that all squashed. So that's why those kinds of testimony things and hypnosis has to be so solid with someone who's.
A court is theoretically beyond a reasonable doubt, and hypnosis never is. Testimony, right. Human testimony never is. Really.
Well, right. And I mean, there's certainly more reliable than others, but you have to, there's a line there.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, great question. I wanted to address that because there's, such a good question. It relates to the polyvagal. It also relates to the whole essential tremor thing because it's all in the brain and the emotional center. And, and people can have essential tremors just from having memories that they don't even have unblocked yet, which is why I was kind of tying it together, that you can have like more anxiety that creates that, more stress and more anxiety. But the other thing I was going to say, because I was going to come back to that, being in an environment where you have a lot of loud noises and repeated dinging, like for instance, if someone worked like in a casino or if someone was working at a racetrack or if someone was working at an amusement park or someone was working at a concert venue, essential tremors are sometimes more prominent in certain people because of those things, because what they're doing is they're stimulating the brain to produce the essential tremor, which is why we are constantly on kids about gaming, because gaming can cause early on essential tremors because they hold in such a spot and they're constantly being stimulated in the brain that they walk away and what's happening? They're tremoring because they have chronic polyvagal dysregulation.
Yeah.
And so that they're tremoring. Just saying.
Interesting.
I know.
Yeah.
Things to think.
Yeah.
So anyway, everyone, thank you so much and having a lovely week of the show with me. And I'm working now on 5 more different guests that I didn't know I was going to be working on today.
And we love the questions. I love the questions.
And I love the questions. And please keep the questions coming. I try to get to them when I can. I do probably have another set somewhere coming, or I've had them in the queue somewhere, but I try to get to them without forgetting. But thank you today Kate for joining. She disappeared because I told her to be careful. Ryan, thank you for joining.
Yeah,
I know that a whole bunch of people will be listening in later that will question me up over the week and see this. And hopefully we should put a reel up this week off of this. That'd be fantastic. Yep. All right. So you guys have a fantastic week. Work on your daily game face. Do your best life and live healthy and happy. And I will see you next week. Happy Memorial Day. I missed that.